Hello everyone, Austin here. Today I will be ranking all of the monsters in Lethal Company. I recently streamed to YouTube Live for 20 hours last week, and one of the most common questions I got during that stream was which monsters were my favorite and least favorite. And because I was asked so many times, I've decided to just make a video on it. I'll be ranking these monsters based on how dangerous I think they are, on how fun or rewarding it is to interact with them, and also just the overall vibe that they bring to the run whenever they make an appearance. A bit of a disclaimer before we get started though, even though I put quite a bit of thought into these rankings, it's still really not that serious. Because at the end of the day, Lethal Company is a horror comedy game, and we should remember that the design choices that were made to make these monsters had that in mind. So we should remember that as we move forward into ranking these monsters. That said, if you want something more serious, then you can go check out my second channel, Remove the Friction, where I talk about personal development and content creation stuff with a new upload every single day. So subscribe to that channel if you're a real one. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I've left a link to the channel in the description below. But now that that's out of the way, since I have to do that for every video, let's get into the tier list. So starting off, we got the Hoarding Bug, which is one of the most iconic little guys in the game, and I'm going to put him up here at A tier. He can make a run either more difficult or even easier for you depending on what kind of loot he steals and how many of them there are. If he steals loot and brings it farther into the facility, then you have to worry about stealing that loot back while also making it out in time and also not dying to him. Also, if there's more than one of these guys, because I think there can be up to 5 of them at a time per power level or something like that, then it can be a bit more troublesome trying to take your loot back. On the flip side, if you're having trouble finding loot for whatever reason, then these guys can be a good source of loot. You can just have them steal loot for you in the meantime and then just take it all back from them at the end of the run. And if you're any good at using shovels, then it shouldn't be that hard to get rid of these guys. So danger-wise, they're not crazy dangerous. Vibes-wise, love to see them. I mean, you see how many YouTube shorts and whatever come up with the Yippee mod and all that, and just overall, just a solid contribution to the game. Next one is the Bracken. That's just easiest S tier of my life. Probably the most iconic enemy in the game. Very fun interactions, both as a beginner and as a seasoned employee. As a beginner, it's one of the more terrifying things that you can encounter because of all the jump scares and whatnot. And even after having 200 hours in the game, it still gets me every now and again. And now that the game's been out for a while and people have been labbing how to deal with the Bracken, you can also just fight the Bracken straight up with the shovel if you understand its pathing well enough. Or if you're good enough to secure a shotgun, you can dispatch of it that way. There's even now a more advanced way to do it. I guess if you jump in the air, then the Bracken can't track you and you can just cheese it. If you want to go watch how to actually do that, you can go watch Cynic's video. He put it up a couple days ago, and some pretty useful stuff to get rid of the Bracken. That said, the Bracken takes up 3 power levels and isn't crazy difficult to deal with just normally. You just have to make sure to be on the lookout for a Bracken every 15 to 20 seconds or so, and then you'll be good. It does suck sometimes if you just randomly get your neck snapped, but it's also part of the game, you know? Just gotta load up, just restart, move on with your life. So yeah, Bracken S tier enemy. Dangerous, yes, at least more so than the Hoarding Bug. Vibes, crazy, and just overall awesome enemy. Next one is the Spider. Spider, I'm going to put in B tier. Normally when I see a spider, I'm happy to see it because once a spider is set up for good, then you barely have to interact with it at all. It'll just stay in one portion of the map, and you know that you're good for 3 power levels. For example, if you see this on experimentation, you know that there's only going to be one other enemy on the map, and it's going to take up only 1 power level, and the map is going to be relatively safe so long as you don't have to go into the spider's territory. That said, if you do have to go into the spider's territory for whatever reason, these guys hit super hard for almost no reason, doing 90 damage with each attack, which is pretty insane because if you've taken damage previously in the run, you will just die if you happen to get hit by one of these. That said, they are pretty easy to fight off with a shovel. You just got to make sure to run backwards and that you have enough room to run backwards while swinging at them. You will get caught out every now and again. It just happens, and sometimes it sucks to lose a run to a spider when you could have just left it alone, or if it just happens to spawn in a very inconvenient spot. But I am putting it at B tier because it's not as iconic as these two, and the fact that you don't even have to interact with it most of the time makes it a cool thing to see, but also not the craziest fun thing to interact with. Speaking of fun interactions, looks like we have the masked enemy next, or as some people call them, mimics. I'm gonna put these guys in B tier with the spider. When these guys first got added to the game, it was a nice change of pace because not only was it the first indoor enemy that could also go outside, but it also made group play a bit more risky because if someone got caught out by one of these, then they also turned into a mask, and then it just became a lot of masked driven insanity. It's the first time where an item can turn you into an enemy also if you happen to pick up a tragedy or comedy mask. So concept wise, I love these guys. They used to give me a hard time when they first came out, and I had a lot of trouble dealing with them, especially when they would just randomly show up in my ship and I wouldn't have anything to fight them off with. But the thing is, they have such huge hurt boxes that you should be able to just deal with them anyway, and now I just really don't like seeing them at all. Vibes, they just throw the vibe off completely. So I'm throwing them down here in B tier with the spider, slightly below them. I don't think they're as dangerous as a spider, but I think that mentally, I'd rather see a spider than any amount of these guys on my maps. Luckily, they only spawn on the paid moons, and actually only Ren and Titan actually. I used to like going to Dine because these guys wouldn't show up there, but now that I've been anti-turret and anti-mind pilled, I'd rather go to Ren and deal with these guys than go to Dine any day of the week. Next enemy, probably the worst mob in the game, the Hydro Deer slime. I'm gonna put them at the very bottom here in D tier. I feel like this is just kind of a filler monster. You see one of these and it's just like, oh, there's a slime. Very unlikely to die to them. And they're also just easy to deal with. You can put them behind a door and they will never be able to open it. At most, they're probably just gonna be an annoying obstacle that you have to deal with and waste a bunch of time. So there's not as much going on for it in the interactability or fun type thing. I guess if you want to give it a boombox, that's probably the most fun thing you can do with it. Or if you want to hit it and make a funny noise, then that's cool, I guess. But not much going on for this guy. And they also like to camp the entrances, and that's not really fun either. Danger, low. Fun, low. So tier list placement, also low. And now we go to one of the other iconic monsters in Lethal Company, the Coil Head. I'm going to put up here in A tier. I really love the Coil Head's design, and also just how you play around them. I mean, Weeping Angel and SCP aside, this is just a very good implementation of the look at me or I move and kill you gameplay. I mean, there's a reason why if you put Coil Head in any of your Lethal Company videos on YouTube that people will watch it. It's just a very fun and interesting monster to look at, but it's also one of the more dangerous ones to deal with too, especially since you can't kill them. And while Coil Heads aren't so bad on their own, if you do Coil Head plus any monster, especially like Bracken or Thumper, then it just gets really difficult to deal with in general. But just because things are difficult doesn't mean that they're not fun or that there's ways to work around it. Nowadays you can trap coil heads on both the mansion and factory interiors. The mansion interior you can trap them on the staircase, and on the factory one you can trap them on that little box where there's the 3 hallways or whatever. I don't know what that big room is called, but you can watch that on Cynic's channel also. Cynic has a video on that one on how to trap them on the factory interior, and then Bread has the video on how to trap coil heads and jesters on the mansion interior. So if you're not aware of those, go check those out. But yeah, Coil Head, great enemy. I'm not going to put them up in S tier because I think there are some other monsters that should go up here instead, but I think A tier along with the Hoarding Bug is a fair placement for them. Speaking of enemies that I think belong in S tier, we got the Nutcracker coming up next, which I'm going to put right behind the Bracken here. When the Nutcracker first came out, I felt like it didn't really make sense in the context of the game and surrounded by all the other monsters available. I mean, it did come out around Christmas time, so I thought as a seasonal enemy it would be kind of fun, but it's well past Christmas now and the Nutcracker is here to stay. And the more I got to play with the Nutcracker, the more I came to like it. I already liked how you had to interact with the Nutcracker even before I learned how to dispatch them. Super well designed enemy, I think, and the reward for being able to dispatch one of these is one of the best rewards that has been introduced to the game. The whole game of Lethal Company changes once you go from having a shovel as your only means of defense to picking up a shotgun and just having the confidence to face pretty much any monster in the game after that. And the fact that the shotgun is also worth a lot as a scrap item too, lots of reward for the risk of taking care of them. And also dealing with Nutcrackers is pretty consistent too. So once you learn how to properly deal with one, then you go from being like, oh no, there's a Nutcracker, to, oh heck yeah, there's a Nutcracker, let me go after it. So yeah, S tier enemy. I don't think they're as iconic as the Bracken. I'm not sure if there's any monster that actually is. So it's gonna go right up here behind the Bracken up in S tier. Next is the Ghost Girl. I'm gonna put her in C tier. I like the idea of the Ghost Girl, and again, this is from a horror comedy perspective. It was super funny earlier on when no one really knew what the Ghost Girl was, and the fact that only one person can see her at a time, it just led to a lot of funny moments for a lot of friend groups out there who are playing Lethal Company for the first time. But as time goes on, it kind of just sucks to see a Ghost Girl on your run, because then it just puts your whole run on a timer, and for people who want to go on higher quota runs or who just want to stay on the moon and play the game, this just kind of puts a damper on that entire plan. And now you have to play around the fact that you are going to get haunted and there isn't all that much you can do about it. I mean, I'm sure there is counterplay out there, but even so, that counterplay isn't really as fun as dealing with any of the above enemies, and the danger is just kind of arbitrary, really. So I'm just gonna put it here. It's fun at first, but when you're trying for a more serious run, then it's just kind of, wow, okay. Next enemy is the Spore Lizard, which isn't even really an enemy. I consider the Spore Lizard a friend. Based on vibes alone, I'm gonna put Spore Lizard up here in A tier above all of these ones. It's just kind of like a good mental check, a little bit of positivity that you can find in each one of your runs. You see a Spore Lizard, you should just be happy to see him. There is a clip of me on my first time ever playing Lethal Company where I just got super scared by this guy because, I mean, it does look a bit terrifying. It's just a huge lizard with a big mouth, but once you've played the game a bit and realize that the Spore Lizard is more scared of you than you are of it, then it just becomes a nice little guy to encounter. Very similar to encountering hoarding bugs, except this one has a lot less chances of actually killing you or harming your run in some way. That said, it is still possible to die to the Spore Lizard, and if you've died to a Spore Lizard before, let me know in the comments below so I know that I'm not the only one who's done it. But yeah, Spore Lizard will be the only one who gets ranked up this high based on its vibes, despite it not even posing a threat to your run and even posing as a positive to your run. Speaking of dangers to your run, the next one is a Jester, which I'm gonna put in C tier as well. I'm gonna put it above the Ghost Girl at least. In my opinion, the Jester has the best jump scares in the game, even more so than the Bracken, because there's just no sound that it makes when it walks up to you. When you turn around and look at the Bracken, there's a sound response that can inform you that the Bracken is changing phases. Whereas when you look at the Jester, it makes no noise still, and only starts making noise once it starts cranking. The reason why I put it in C tier, despite that being such a funny thing, is because when you see a Jester, you just have, you are forced to play around this thing. You have to be ready to exit the facility and then do the whole waiting game outside after it's popped to make it reset, and you're now operating on a timer as well for how long you can stay inside the facility. I'm putting it above the Ghost Girl because I like the design of the Jester way better than the Ghost Girl, and it's still possible to clear out the moon even when a Jester makes its appearance, but it's gonna stay in C tier because it's kind of annoying to deal with still anyway, and I'd rather just have any of these monsters above it appear on the map than have this one there. That said, you are able to trap Jesters now permanently as well. You can trap them on the mansion staircase just like you can with the coil head, and you can trap them in that one room on the factory. So I guess they're a bit easier to deal with now, but I think they still deserve to stay here in C tier. Next is the Snare Flea, which has been the bane of so many of my runs, especially the duo ones, and also the main reason why I carry a shovel on my early game, no matter what. And I'm gonna put them right here in B tier. I think they're appropriately placed between the spider and the masked. It is funny whenever someone gets Snare Flea'd, and I like that if you yourself get Snare Flea'd, that you still have counterplay. You just have to be able to find your shovel and smack it off your own head, and yeah, there's really not much else to say about that. At first, I didn't really like that it forced me to bring a shovel, because before I used to only just like bring a flashlight and nothing else. But even without the Snare Flea there, I think nowadays I'd still be bringing a shovel anyway, because I'd be able to deal with a lot of other threats, especially in the early game. So Snare Flea is just kind of something you have to look out for nowadays, and really isn't difficult to deal with. So I'm gonna put it here. I don't mind seeing them. I still like seeing the spider more, and I would rather see a Snare Flea than a mask at this point. So that's why it's gonna be right here. Speaking of enemies that I need to dispatch with a shovel regardless of if there's a Snare Flea or not, we got the Thumper next. Thumper I'm going to put up here in A tier actually, right here above the Spore Lizard. As much as I want to put the Spore Lizard above any of these, I think the fact that it's not a dangerous entity at all keeps it right here at the end of A tier. But Thumper is A tier because it's one of the early game monsters that can just strike legitimate fear into newer players in a very different way than the Bracken does, because the Bracken is more of like a when is it gonna come at me next, whereas the Thumper is just really in your face kind of thing. It's actually the killable enemy that I have the most trouble dealing with, I guess because of inexperience with it still, but I've been trying to get more experience with fighting Thumpers, and if you want to see how that goes, you can check out my video from yesterday where I went to offense with Larry and just tried to survive inside the interior for as long as possible, and we had our fair share of Thumper encounters there. The reason why it's not S tier is because I feel like the hitboxes on the Thumpers are pretty weird sometimes, but I'm just gonna chalk that up to a skill issue rather than a design issue, because yeah, I mean, there's people who can dispatch Thumpers, and I'm only that person half the time, I guess. But it's not a run killer. If anything, it makes a run exciting, but I'd much rather see a Thumper at the end of a run rather than at the beginning, because it's still pretty likely to take damage from a Thumper, and it does a decent amount of damage whenever it hits you, so you don't want to take damage earlier in the run because you don't know what you're going to encounter later. That damage could be the difference between you dying and making it to the next quota. That's all of the interior monsters ranked, so all that's left are the outdoor ones. And for some reason, Circuit Bees are on here as an enemy. I don't really consider them an enemy, so I'm gonna put them right here above the slime in D tier. If anything, we're the ones that are being enemies to the circuit bees. The circuit bees, all they want to do is just chill at their hive, but we're the ones that are antagonizing them for the sake of profit. So it only just makes sense that they're gonna come after us. So if you die to a circuit bee, it's 100% your fault, and they're not monsters. They're just trying to live their lives. If anything, we're the monsters in that case. That's why it goes into D tier. Not really a monster, but it's still way more interesting than this slime could ever be, so it's going one spot above the final spot. Next is the eyeless dog. Eyeless dog, eyeless dog does not go into D tier. D tier does not stand for that kind of dog. I'm gonna put eyeless dog up in S tier, and I'm putting them up there mostly because of the role that the eyeless dogs play when it comes to a newcomer's experience to Lethal Company. Back when I first started playing Lethal Company, I was convinced that all the danger was inside the facility and that outside is just kind of like a safe haven. And if you look at everyone's playthroughs, especially their first time ones, that's just kind of a consistent understanding that people have. But then that all changes when it gets to nighttime and an eyeless dog rolls up on your ship and just takes out your whole crew. That was supposed to be your safe haven, now it's taken away from you, so now what? It's also just kind of a fun mechanic too, especially when you're playing in multiplayer. You have an enemy that requires you to cut off comms that you normally think is safe, and it just responds to a bunch of different sound cues also, like footsteps or you dropping scrap. I think it's just a well-designed addition to Lethal Company. That's why I'm putting it up in S tier with two of the most iconic monsters in the game. And as a seasoned employee as well, the eyeless dogs aren't even impossible to deal with, and it can actually be kind of fun too. In a future video, I'm gonna practice actually killing them, because it is possible to kill them with just a shovel. It's just something that I need to actually do, because it's not something that I do very often, and it's something that I want to get kind of decent at, even if the reward for doing so isn't really worth the risk. Speaking of risk, the next outdoor monster is the Forest Keeper, which I'm going to put down here in C tier with the Jester and the Ghost Girl. Now, there are ways to deal with it. You can bring a stun grenade and it can let go of you or whatever, or if you're in a multiplayer lobby, you can bring a radar booster and have someone flashing the giant for you as you go. But it's not really fun to see a forest giant, to be honest. It's just kind of like a danger that you're required to deal with, which is very much in line with the other monsters that I've put in C tier here. Now, I will say that it is pretty fun stealthing a giant, but let's say you encounter one of these on like Rend, Dine, or Titan, or on a foggy moon where the visibility isn't really in your favor. It doesn't really make sense to me that they can just kind of see right through that, and they just have full advantage over you in that sense. So I'm gonna leave him down here in C. Next, we have the Sandworm. I'm gonna put him, or the Sandworm, down in D tier, because I also don't think these are crazy fun to play against. I will say that it's pretty funny to find them at first. I remember when I would play Lethal Company in the beginning, whenever anyone saw one of these for the first time, they would just be flabbergasted at what had just happened. And when you would die to this without knowing that this was in the game, there was just no explanation for why you died outside, other than whatever rumbling you heard right before you died. But after knowing that this is in the game, it's not the most fun to play around, especially since if you mess it up even just a little bit, then you just kind of die and your run is over. And even if you do know how to play around it, there's also that very small chance that the Sandworm just pops out of the ground immediately and kills you, regardless if you were playing it correctly or not. And I'd rather just not deal with them if I had the opportunity to. Speaking of enemies that I'd rather not deal with, we got the Baboon Hawk as our last enemy to rank. I think I'm gonna put Baboon Hawk here at the bottom of C tier. Baboon Hawk's just kind of like a worse outdoor loot bug. They used to give me a lot of problems in the beginning because I didn't really know how to deal with them, and they would just spike my anxiety and blood pressure from all the squawking and just how fast they move. But now that I know that they operate based on proximity and numbers, all you gotta do is really stay away from them, and they'll leave you alone. They'll take up a power level, it's fine. And they also fight the eyeless dogs, so that's kind of cool. But nowadays, I also don't really like that they fight the eyeless dogs, because now there's just unnecessary aggro going around, especially on maps like Assurance, where there isn't even a lot of outdoor to begin with. So if dogs and Baboon Hawks are just kind of going rampant at each other, there's just a small chance that the dog might run into you instead, or the Baboon Hawk will be chased into you and start attacking you instead. And the fact that they might move your loot piles outside, because they can pick up loot if you leave it around, that also just makes it really annoying too. It's an issue that I run into mostly on Assurance, and I guess the opinions that I have about Baboon Hawks and Sandworms are mostly based on how often I run Eclipsed Assurance. So I've just ran into these guys way too many times and just had too many bad experiences with them, and just don't really enjoy their presence on my runs. But that's why whenever I do a non-Eclipse run, I'm just so joyed that these outdoor enemies aren't even there. Then I just have all this fun stuff to play with, and all I gotta do is make sure that I'm in and out before any of these become an issue, and then I'm good. But But yeah, that's all of the enemies in Lethal Company ranked and in order. Let me know if you agree or disagree with these placements down below in the comments, and let me know why. And if you want to see more tier list stuff like this, or just want to hear more of my thoughts on the game, then also let me know too, because I'm also down to just talk about the game rather than just play it all the time. But I will continue playing it. I have a lot of fun stuff planned for this week, so stay tuned for that, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good week, everyone. Let's make a profit quota or something. Peace.